Good afternoon and welcome to Book Splash on Splash FM 105.5 Ibadan. This is a program for book lovers, lovers of the arts and writers. I am Michael Olatunbosun. Today we have a book of poetry on the table, so let's get poetic as we discuss the collection of 42 poems titled Echoes and Chimes, written by Prof. Francis Egbokhare and published in 2020 by Poets in Nigeria Initiative, Lagos. The author, Francis Egbokhare, is a professor of linguistics in the Department of Linguistics and African Languages, University of Ibadan, where he attained the feat of becoming one of the youngest professors in the university at the age of 37. He attended the University of Benin for his bachelor's degree and the University of Ibadan for his master's and PhD. Professor Egbokhare is widely published in local and international journals. Some of his works include Song of My Dreams, Christ Conscious Mind, Praying Mantis, Volume 1 and 2, Introductory Phonetics, and many others. He has also published about 35 books and essays on Imai, his mother tongue, in the space of 20 years. Professor Egbokhare is a fellow of the Nigerian Academy of Letters, Institute of Social Work of Nigeria, Institute of Development Administration, Linguistic Association of Nigeria, and Alexander von Humboldt Stiftung. He is the current president of the Nigerian Academy of Letters. Echoes and Chimes is his latest work. In the preface to the collection, the author states, and I quote, "Echoes and Chimes captures an attempt to understand the world through poetry. You will see a thread that runs through my academic experience, the disappointment with our intellectual enterprise. In some of the poems in this poetry collection, love is expressed, while in others there is a philosophical message that is evolving but by no means definitive. In Echoes and Chimes, there is an existential challenge and a transcendental engagement of the world." End of quote. So, each of the poems in the collection carries a big picture and message for the attentive reader and lover of poetry. In the opening poem of the collection titled Casualties of Depravities, the poet discusses the society's false sense of security and statelessness, which the poet describes as quote-unquote a disappearing tower. In this poem, an obviously angry poet persona appears to be miffed by the fact that his subjects have a false perception of grandeur. In other words, the poet believes that his subjects are all casualties of their collective corruption. In the poem Mumu, the poet persona addresses Africa and calls her to shake off the shackles of the powerful West. From the title of this poem, Mumu, the poet is visibly alarmed at the foolish stupidity of Africa and its people in the way that the West has completely recolonized the people, making them the laughingstock of the earth and a laboratory for every untested theory. For instance, the poet here writes, and I quote, "Your habitations have become the laboratory of failed experiments. Your young are the guinea pigs of mindless research. The women are laid down in desert storms, ravished in the dunes, and the men are plowed up to fertilize Leviathan." Additionally, the poet is alarmed that the things of Africa and about Africa are no longer attractive to our people, and all you find around is an unthinking, sheepish mimicry of all things Western. In the poem, The New World, the poet questions the death of morality and the celebration of the mundane and the weird. The poet wonders about what has happened to the world, where life is now on reverse in everything that used to be the standard. Here the poet, I quote, "In the new world, roles are reversed, men have wombs, women grow phalluses, children guardian parents, pets babysit owners, teachers submit to infertile genius, masters are servants of the expert crowd, much as the market is wise without being." End of quote. The poet also thinks that the world has lost itself in the ensuing confusion occasioned by the elevation of the love of self and individuality at the expense of common sense. This new world, as pictured by the poet, is a world that now glamorizes lies and dresses it in the garb of truth. Lustful sex is packaged as love, and every truth is relative. For the poet, this is a world where every good ideal and value is archaic. It is a world on a highway to nowhere. You are still listening to Book Splash on Splash FM 105.5 Ibadan, and the book on the table is Echoes and Chimes, a collection of poems written by Prof. Francis Egbokhare. In this collection, the poet continually challenges the new values of the new world and how developments and advances in technology and ICT are changing the way we live and engage. Despite being a member of the academia, the poet has a long, strong whip for the occupiers of our ivory towers, so he holds out his cane, lashing at them. In the poem Cranks of Knowledge, the poet takes a swipe at the ivory towers, his constituency. It describes the university as a ground where merchants hold sway, dishing out uninteresting, dull, drab, and uninspiring lessons to the learners. For the poet, the university has become the place where young minds are bred, not to be useful for their nation and the world, but to contribute to its ruin. The poet writes here, I quote, "Uni baranda, self is best, raising crude minds for a woeful cause. Social injustice, unequal chance, greatness forced with guileless farce." In the poem, Stampede of Impostors, the poet chants about the abolition of values and the unholy ululations of shallow and mindless minding of ignorance at the expense of intellect. Also in this collection, the poet draws upon the biblical imagery of the Pharisee to describe the over-righteous blindness of our society, including the leaders and followers. In the poem, Pharisees are not from the past. The poet lampoons the society for its over-spirituality and fake God consciousness, but inability to reflect this in actions towards neighbors. In an apparent derogation of their fake religiosity, the poet lambasts the leaders of religion, sticking on them labels that suggest that they have abandoned their fundamental obligations and responsibilities to their people. The poet writes, "Pharisees wear oversized crosses, nailed tight to their frame. Rigid their posture is, they cannot stoop to serve. They wear the law around their necks like a garment for sinners to read. They are signposts to show others the way, but miss their own way. Because they cannot read off themselves, Pharisees eat fat to proclaim a fast. They counsel contentment, so to have enough to fill their belly bands. They dress powerfully like kings and queens, even though their followers languish in rags." End of quote. But before you stick your fingers out to nail the Pharisees, the poet claims here that the Pharisees are goaded on in their pursuit of vanity because their followers are ignorantly complicit. Hear the poet here. "Their skins are leprous from heresy, but they do not know so because of high office and adulations of ignorant men." Then in a twist, the poet turns on all and christens all as Pharisees. Listen, he says, "Pharisees are you and I. We look to see God far away. We fail to see him nearby. We are so tuned to the voices of angels that the cries of widows and orphans are lost. We are full of the law and fail to understand its purpose. We are so righteous that we have no need of God. Pharisees ride in chariots of ostentation. They gather together those cracked by hardship and make them high on greed. Their eyes are misty from covetousness, their ears dulled by worldliness." You're still listening to Book Splash, and I'm discussing the collection of poems, Echoes and Chimes, written by Prof. Francis Egbokhare. In this work, the poet repeatedly laments the vanity of humanity and the attendant cycle of conception, birth, death, and burial. The poet brings this imagery as a backdrop to caution humans to be humble and shun arrogant accumulation of wealth and arrogation of powers. In this work, the poet decries the treacherous deceit that is veiled in the gaps of friendship. In this work, the poet writes in eulogy of nature. For instance, in the poem The Moon and the Sun, the poet writes of the moon as quote-unquote soft, meek and gentle lights and a bewitching enticer, and the sun as an energizer of the day. In this work, Echoes and Chimes, Professor Egbokhare writes about Ibadan, a city where he has spent a large chunk of his life. In a seeming parody of J.P. Clark's version of the poem Ibadan, and an obvious anger at the attitude of its inhabitants to sanitation, cleanliness, and other, Professor Egbokhare's version is titled Ibadan Revisited, and he writes, I quote, "Ibadan, oozing dross of rust and mush, squashed and splattered among hills of human wastes like Bodija Market in the rain." In this collection, we are confronted with poems on religion and religiosity, faith and fantasies. In this collection, the poet also gives us a sweet serving of love songs as well. And in the closing verses of the collection, Echoes and Chimes, the poet serves the reader a bite of his running advocacy for the recognition and adoption of Pidgin and hybrid of English and some indigenous African languages. In the final analysis, the work Echoes and Chimes is an aggregation of the poet's anger, protests, and aspirations about the world around him, as well as its occupants. In 67 pages of this collection, the poet has packed as much messages as possible into the poems, enough to entertain, educate, and set agenda for the reader. The program is Book Splash on Splash FM 105.5, and this is the convenient point to bring my guest to the microphone. In this conversation, Professor Francis Egbokhare tells me why he wrote the collection, Echoes and Chimes. He discusses the themes in the collection, his love for the pidgin language, and his message for Nigeria. The title of the book is Echoes and Chimes, a collection of poems written by Professor Francis Egbokhare, and the author is here. Welcome to Book Splash, sir.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here again, yes. Michael.
I've always known you as an academic, someone who has, really, held his own in the field of academics. So how did you come about creative writing?
Well, let me say that it started out of frustration. Actually, I did literature in the secondary school when I was a secondary school student. I had an A1 in literature, actually, but that was just for the purpose of passing exams. Mm-hmm. And then I went for youth service in the then old Anambra State in 1983, Anambra North. And I was very lonely. The conditions in the village then was not too good for a young person like me who was looking forward to socializing and getting really the thrill of life. It was a very rural area, no power supply. I was one of the very few graduates at 21. I was just 21 years old, and most of my students in the class then were older than me. And there I was, stranded, desperately looking for friendship, looking to make friends, and I realized that I was going to have a rough time. So I went back to finding a way to occupy myself. And then that was when I started to, again, revive my interest in poetry. So in a way, you would say that I rediscovered poetry as a verve. Poetry performed a verving function to let out all the tensions and all the frustrations that I was feeling at that time.
So it was more like a therapy for you.
It was a therapy, more or less, given the circumstances under which I existed. But I didn't know actually that when in school I was being taught precis writing and static description, that in a way I was getting myself ready to engage the world of poetry in whatever little way that existed.
Echoes and Chimes. In your preface, you wrote that it is this an attempt to understand the world through poetry. And just like we were saying earlier, it's more like it was therapeutic for you, writing poetry to escape that world that was trying to, just gag you.
Well, maybe not escape it, but maybe embrace it.
Wow.
Because if you look at what I've tried to do, basically, I've tried to understand the world rather than fight the world. Give expression to the world. In that way, like you said, it was therapeutic, and also prevented me from taking. So I took the actions that I would never normally have taken physically. I took out the actions on words. As a linguist, we are trained to crush words. As a linguist, we crush words. But when you deal with the poetry and so on, the caress words, with all the nuances and so on. So I've learned to be very sensitive to words, and I keep on listening to what is not said, and even for what is said, what is missing, and so on. So in a way, poetry prevented me from being who I didn't want to be.
Echoes and Chimes also, from the much that I've read in your book, you sound like someone on a protest in this collection.
Yes.
So tell me the story, sir.
Well, I happen to have lived and seen two sides of life. I grew up, started getting to be a young man after the Civil War. My first 7 years, I was born in 1962. And we started experiencing after 70s the effect of the Civil War, the malnutrition, the scarcity. And then, of course, we got out of that to the years of prosperity. My father was a school principal. My mom retired as a headmistress. So we basically were not poor, in terms of when I even look back today and saw what was our standard of living. Some of the people who call themselves millionaires today could not afford what we could afford, at that point in time. So I saw that. And I saw the crash of our economy, that I was even more prosperous as a university student than I am now as a professor. So you can see exactly having to face life within a lifetime of about a couple of decades, seeing all the possible sides of life, from extreme prosperity to extreme poverty, and then now again trying to make your way up,
crawl back
to a certain level of standard of living, and then again you see there is a puncture of the bubble again, and then you are finding yourself drifting down. So the frustration of knowing that things could be different, and also having traveled wide around the world and seeing that things could be different, and that we have all the things that we need to make things different and become leaders in the world. I resorted to poetry, because with poetry, you do not need many people to gather together with you and to plan any course of action, because that challenge is always there when you have to work in trade unionism, for instance, or work with social movements and so on. So poetry provides you with that sanctuary where you could express your frustration and then be who you are without compromising.
And one of those ways is to, put these words down. In this poem, The New World.
Yes.
In the New World, roles are reversed. Men have wombs, women grow phalluses. Children, guardian parents, pets, babysit owners, teachers submit to infantile genius. Masters are servants of the expert crowd, much as the market is wise without being. In the modern world, you choose your gender, construct your own confusion in the elevation of opinion unhindered by supervision in competition for division. Today, lies pose as euphemism, falsehood as euphuism. And integrity is an aphorism we raise against time. In our rush for now, we forget the tense, but elevate the mood. Patience is the new crime. Hope is the loser's moniker in WebX world. The stranger is the enemy, and the vulnerable is a product transacted for leverage. Old age is a cancer. We all must act youth or be erased. I sense here that this new world that you have pictured in this poem is a world where the values have turned upside down.
Yes,
and everybody is on his own now.
And the point I was trying to, what does it mean to be human?
Wow.
You see, we are now again talking about the new norms. Nobody is talking about what the new norms actually are. We have now become like nanobots, robots, programmed human beings to repeat only what algorithm gives us to repeat. So everything is going upside down. We are accepting everything without questioning, and we are changing exactly what it means to be a human being and what it means to be human. And we are all just there as if we are helpless. So basically what I'm trying to do is to challenge and let people sit down and also question some of the things that are happening. What is humanity without community? We have not asked ourselves what is humanity without community. By the time you remove community for humanity, by the time you distort the culture to make what makes us being human relevant, then you discover that we have to find a way to classify ourselves. Maybe no more human beings. Maybe we've become androids.
Okay. Echoes and Chimes is the title of the collection of poems written by Professor Francis Egbokhare. He is still here. This poem is titled Mumu. Mumu, wake up. Africa, shine your eyes. Your mumu don't do. Your habitations have become the laboratory of failed experiments. Your young are the guinea pigs of mindless research. The women are laid down in desert stumps, ravished in the dunes, and the men are plowed up to fertilize Leviathan. My reading here is that you are calling Africa to come back to life.
Yes.
That we have now become the laboratory of every failed and failing theory all over the world.
Yes.
You are very angry at Africa.
Very, very angry. Very angry because I know that this is not the true story of Africa. Very angry because I have read so much. I know that the whole business of civilization started with Africa. Very angry because we have been erased completely. History is not fair to us. The fact that a lot of what is celebrated as the Western civilization today had their origins in Africa. I'm not talking about the so-called Africa, the Arab world. I'm talking about the Black Africa. That civilization, actually science, technology, the foundations of it started here. But we've been erased and we've been sold the colonial story, the story of slavery. And so we are now deformed beyond recognition. And I'm saying that we can't continue like this. You see the story of migration across the deserts, for instance, and what happens to young Africans across the Mediterranean Sea, how we are debased and insulted everywhere. If you have traveled wide, you see how you are treated in other countries. And the fact that we also allow ourselves to be treated as if we are a country. When you talk about Africa, people see Africa as if Africa is a country, or even a state in a country. Meanwhile, nobody talks about Europe as a country. Nobody talks about Asia. It's every time you want to talk about Africa, you talk about Africans as if Africa. And meanwhile, we are the most diverse continent in the world. The black man is the most. I mean, we are the most diverse. In terms of color, in terms of culture, in terms of everything, in terms of language, we are the most diverse continent. But they still treat us, the countries, like streets. Nigeria is a street in Africa. Ghana is probably a hamlet in Africa. And this is the kind of thing I'm saying that enough. We need to wake up. And there are things we need to do actually to start to tell a new story about ourselves and to begin to do things right.
You have poems in this collection that, really also challenge our morality. You have poems that also talk about religion, the positive and the negative, practice that we, bring to the table when it comes to religion. You have poems about love and the rest of them. One of those poems that really caught me is this one. I know that you are a very, strong member of the academic world.
Yeah.
You have this one titled Cranks of Knowledge.
Yes.
And your first line is Unibaranda, knuckleheads of trite learning, deep the truth, bogie spring for all who thirst.
Yeah.
Cranks of knowledge to endure. Pledge to serve famished goons, self-service, impunity, that our nation, nay, with pride, help to ruin a world that is truly free. Unibaranda. Self is best. Raising crude minds for a woeful cause. Social injustice, unequal chance. Greatness forced with guileless farce. Guide our people this to loathe wisdom's best to service turned. Help enshrine the while to scheme for a man that wins justifies the means. Now, my reading of this poem is basically that you are angry at what goes on in the ivory towers in this world, particularly in Africa, where we're supposed to train people to reform them, to make them better members of society who would come out and make society better.
Yes.
But then it is the opposite that we're getting.
The thing basically is that I am disappointed actually at the academia. I'm not excluding myself in terms of a lack of capacity to make the difference. There are two things you have to watch out for in any country. They point to a disaster. When every other thing fails and you still see the academia standing with moral values, with integrity, you know that the country has hope. But when they become the proponents of all that is bad and evil in a community, then you know that country is bracing for war. Because that will be the collapse of all the sense of morality in the system. So what I did here basically is a spoof on the University of Ibadan anthem to use that all the great ideas to turn it on its head, to say, look, rather than doing all these great things that stand for the academia, the intellectual, we are doing the opposite. Because everything is more or less, we are not helping the students. If you ask any university today to tell you what they have contributed to national development, they will tell you the number of students and graduates that they have produced. But that's an output. It's not the impact. Now you ask yourself, where are those students who are defrauding this nation, the people today, they pass through this university system. So instead of a university to be the last bus stop for reform, where no matter what happened to you at the other level, the universities repackage you. Now, even the students who are looking up to being something in their life, by the time they get to the Nigerian university system, they are totally finished.
They lose it.
Yes, the good ones are turned on their heads. The bad ones are finished completely. And that is really the tragedy of our education system, the university system, the tertiary education system today. That's just the reality.
You just wrote poems here in Pidgin.
Yes.
And this one is titled Fire, Fire.
Yes.
Fire they burn for village. The man wey use grass roof him house must fear. Thunder make bang 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 down.
Yes.
Breeze they blow bad. This poem is beautiful in a lot of ways, particularly this language. This language is beautiful.
Yes.
I mean, the Pidgin
Yes.
is beautiful. I'd like you to read it by yourself.
Fire they burn for village. The man wey use grass roof him house must fear. Thunder make bangana, breeze they blow bad. Wetin make man wey him roof dey leak do? He must to worry and fear. But he don late to do something. Person wey get time to do something wey no do am, e be like ant wey sabi say harvest don come, but e no gather enter him hole. Na the kind ant wey snake and lizard dey wait for. Because why? E must comot from him hole for dry season to find chop. Na him be food for snake. Na him hole yeye animal dem fit hide put. Make we do the thing wey good. Make we no go be had I know wey be brother to Mr. Late.
Wow. Tell me about this, your adventure in, writing poetry in Pidgin.
You see, there's something about Pidgin in the sense that Pidgin is like an interlanguage between English and our African languages. If you listen to anything in Pidgin, you will find out that you can easily get the meaning because it is not so far removed from your mother tongue in terms of the structure, in terms of the content and so on. In fact, unlike your mother tongue, it's so informalized that it expresses whatever it is that the youth culture. It expresses the youth culture first of all, and then it can break down the content into bits that are better understood. Now, the other thing, basically, you know that when people speak English, most Nigerians will say they are blowing grammar. It is because English is obscure. And if you have listened to Lagbaja and Fela, they will tell you that Orowati Yewa, once you speak Pidgin, we get to really understand and flow. But that kind of language is not being pushed. And so the cycle of communication in Nigeria is widening in the sense that the English that we are speaking, basically among ourselves, is really not one English. There are many Englishes in Nigeria. You have the Yorubas with what I call the Yorish. You have the Hausas with what I call the Haish. And there are 500 so much variety depending on our mother tongue interference because we are no longer learning English language through the school system as we used to do, so there are no more convergence. What does that mean? We are now having a communication crisis. So the president comes on radio or television to make a broadcast. He intends one thing and says another. Or he says one thing and we understand many things. So Pidgin does not have this problem. So when you speak Pidgin, we all understand exactly what the person wants, and the arguments are usually not there. But once you speak English, you will discover that the person who spoke the English language will now be said that it was quoted out of context. so, and that is a fundamental evidence that there is a problem of communication. And that problem of communication is linguistically situated. So that's why I'm pushing for Pidgin, because it will take much less effort to elevate Pidgin and then converge and narrow the communication space than to continue to propagate English.
And everybody can connect.
Yeah, we can connect. In fact, with Pidgin, we did a research and found out that so many, even up to Maiduguri and so on, it's a language. It's the language of the street. It's the language of the ordinary man. It's the language now also of the academia. So people are using it. So what is the problem? Is the problem against Pidgin today is ideological. Pidgin now represents an ideology of convergence. And since it is a no man's language, it belongs to everybody. There is that kind of hard boundary that you find, ethnic boundaries that drive the work against other languages, not there for Nigerian Pidgin.
Before we go, sir, I'd like you to tell me the main message you have for Nigeria in this work. Well,
I think my message basically is a message of personal responsibility. That, first of all, every individual must attain clarity, first of all, before he or she starts to give clarity to other people. We've lost that. Everyone is trying to change the other person. We're trying to command and control the space. So the message I'm giving to everyone is that why don't you just slow down, take a deep breath, find out who you are, understand who you are, gain confidence because you know who you are, and then you can have something to share with other people. And then together we keep our own little spaces clean. Then the space, the public space becomes clean. Because if you clean your own house, you're starting by cleaning yourself, then there won't be much out there for us to come together to clean in the public space. But we think we can dump refuse. The analogy basically is this. When it's about to rain in Ibadan, you see what people do. They carry the refuse from their house, they dump in the gutter and dump on the roads. And they expect the rains to do the cleaning. And I always ask, is this not supreme foolishness? Because if you knew that it was not good for your sitting room, because what I would have expected is that if you think that refuse was good for the public space, you should have dumped it in your sitting room. But you didn't do that. So that attitude and mentality must change. And I believe that with medium like this, you can then reflect and then begin to change yourself. And then we'll have a better country and we'll have a better world.
Professor Francis Egbokhare, thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you very much for having me here.
That was my conversation with Professor Francis Egbokhare, author of Echoes and Chimes, our collection of poems. I hope you liked it. If you did, please join me next Saturday, same time, for another edition of Book Splash on Splash FM 105.5 Ibadan. I thank you for listening. And thanks to my sound manager, Victor Daudu, for a job well done. In case you have a comment or query, you can send me a text message on 0805 699 8676 or email olatunbosun@splashfm1055.com. You can follow me on Twitter @MikeTunbosun. My name is Michael Olatunbosun, and I urge you to read the book today.